Good men believe morality protects them. They assume fairness will be returned for fairness. But social systems don't reward morality. They reward leverage. When goodness is not backed by consequence, it is reclassified as availability, and availability is always used. Dangerous men are not immoral. They are consequential. Their presence carries weight before words are spoken. People don't ask what they deserve. They ask what it will cost. That question alone changes behavior. Good men signal safety too early. They over-explain intentions. They reassure before being asked. In doing so, they remove uncertainty. And uncertainty is what keeps people careful. Dangerous men leave questions unanswered, not as a tactic, as a default. Their silence forces others to calculate instead of assume. Calculation slows exploitation. Good men think being liked creates protection. It does the opposite. Likability invites requests. Requests invite pressure. Pressure reveals who can be pushed. Dangerous men are not liked quickly. They are measured. People test distance before closeness. That delay filters out exploitation before it begins. Good men mistake self-sacrifice for strength. But sacrifice without limits becomes expectation. Expectation turns into entitlement. Entitlement produces use. Dangerous men help selectively, not emotionally, strategically. Their assistance never feels guaranteed. Uncertainty preserves value. The world does not exploit kindness, it exploits predictability. Good men become predictable because they tie identity to being good. Dangerous men tie identity to self-control. This is the first brutal truth of Machiavelli. Men are not used because they are good. They are used because nothing happens when they are crossed. Dangerous men are left alone because consequences are implied, not announced. Predictability feels safe to the person who carries it, but to others it feels exploitable. When your reactions, generosity, and limits are known in advance, people stop asking permission. They begin assuming access. Assumption is the first step toward use. Good men often respond the same way every time. Same patience, same forgiveness, same restraint. Consistency without consequence teaches people exactly how far they can go. Dangerous men break patterns deliberately, not emotionally, strategically. Their behavior cannot be mapped, so exploitation feels risky instead of easy. Predictability removes calculation from others. They don't think, they act. Danger is avoided not because it is loud, but because it is uncertain. Good men explain themselves when misunderstood. They rush to restore clarity, but clarity removes leverage. Ambiguity forces restraint. Dangerous men allow misinterpretation to exist, not because they enjoy it, but because correction is optional when position is secure. Security makes explanation unnecessary. Predictable kindness becomes entitlement. People stop appreciating it, they schedule it, and scheduled generosity loses value instantly. Dangerous men give unpredictably, not more, not less, just unevenly enough to keep respect intact. Predictability also weakens boundaries. Once people know forgiveness is guaranteed, they stop fearing violation. Fear is not required. Awareness is. This is why Machiavelli warned against being too consistent in mercy. Mercy without uncertainty breeds contempt. Dangerous men are not cruel. They are unreadable enough to remain untouched. Good men focus on intentions. They want to be understood as fair, kind, and reasonable. But the world does not respond to intention. It responds to outcome. When crossing you produces no negative outcome, intention becomes irrelevant, and use becomes logical. Dangerous men don't advertise intentions. They let outcomes speak. People don't remember what they meant. They remember what happened last time someone crossed the line. Good men assume being reasonable will protect them, but reason without consequence feels negotiable. Negotiation invites pressure. Pressure invites exploitation. Dangerous men remove negotiation early, not by force, by certainty. Certainty ends discussion before it begins. When good men are crossed, they explain why it hurt. They describe impact. They hope empathy will correct behavior. Empathy is unreliable. Memory of consequence is not. Dangerous men don't explain violations. They respond once, cleanly, without emotion. That single moment trains behavior more effectively than repeated conversations ever could. Good men fear being misunderstood if they respond firmly. They prioritize being seen as good over being respected. That trade is expensive. Dangerous men accept misunderstanding. They understand that respect does not require approval, only consistency. Intentions are invisible, consequences are not. Invisible signals are ignored. Visible outcomes shape behavior permanently. This is why dangerous men are rarely crossed twice, not because they threaten, but because their presence carries memory, and memory enforces boundaries silently. Good men feel deeply, and they let it show. They react when disappointed. They explain when hurt. They reveal emotion, hoping it will humanize them. But emotion does not humanize power. It exposes access points, and access points are always tested. Dangerous men feel just as much, but they control when it becomes visible. Visibility is not honesty. It is strategy. When emotion is revealed selectively, it commands attention instead of inviting intrusion. Emotional predictability is the fastest way to be used. Once people know what frustrates you, motivates you, or softens you, they stop guessing. And when guessing ends, manipulation begins. Dangerous men interrupt emotional patterns. They don't react where reaction is expected. They remain calm where pressure is applied. That mismatch disorients those looking for leverage. Good men believe emotional openness builds trust, but trust without boundaries creates entitlement. Entitlement leads to demand. Demand leads to use. Dangerous men separate trust from access. They allow people to know them without being able to use them. This separation is rare, and rarity produces caution. Emotional restraint is not suppression, it is ownership. You decide what leaves you, others do not. Good men leak emotion under pressure. Dangerous men compress it. Compression creates density. Density creates presence. When people cannot read your emotional state, they slow down. Slowness protects you, because exploitation requires speed. This is why emotional control marks the line between men who are used and men who are left alone. Not strength, not morality. Control. Good men speak to be understood. They clarify silence quickly, fearing misinterpretation. But silence is not emptiness, it is a signal. And when silence is removed too early, others stop calculating. Calculation is what keeps people careful. Dangerous men let silence exist longer than is comfortable, not as intimidation, as default. That silence forces others to fill gaps with caution instead of assumption. When good men stay silent, they rush to explain it afterward. They soften it, they justify it. But explanation neutralizes the pressure silence creates. Dangerous men do not rescue others from discomfort. They let uncertainty do its work. Discomfort slows people down. Slowness protects boundaries without confrontation. Good men think silence damages relationships, but what actually damages relationships is accessibility without cost. When access is effortless, respect erodes quietly. Dangerous men are not always available, not emotionally, not verbally, not mentally. This absence creates value without negotiation. Silence also removes emotional leakage. No reassurance, no defense, no apology unless chosen. That restraint blocks manipulation before it forms. Good men fear being misjudged. Dangerous men accept being misread. Misreading creates distance. Distance creates safety. Silence becomes powerful when people realize it is not confusion, it is control. And control without explanation feels untouchable. This is not the end of the pattern. It is the shift from reaction to positioning, from being read to being respected. What comes next is where men stop being used entirely. Good men believe being accessible makes them trustworthy. They respond quickly. They explain fully. They make themselves emotionally available on demand. But constant accessibility removes value. What is always reachable is eventually taken for granted, then tested, then used. Accessibility teaches people your limits without resistance. They learn how fast you reply, how patient you are, how much pressure you tolerate. Once limits are mapped, they are pushed automatically. Dangerous men restrict access naturally, not as punishment, as posture. They are not always reachable, not always responsive, not always emotionally open. That uncertainty forces others to self-regulate. Weakness can be respected if it is controlled. Accessibility cannot, because accessibility invites use without confrontation. People don't feel wrong taking what is freely offered. Good men confuse availability with loyalty, but loyalty without selectivity becomes obligation. Obligation removes appreciation, and appreciation is what prevents exploitation. Dangerous men are loyal, but not accessible. They choose when to engage. They choose when to withdraw. This control keeps relationships balanced instead of one-sided. When people must wait for access, they behave better. Waiting increases self-awareness. Self-awareness reduces entitlement. Entitlement is what turns good men into resources. Accessibility removes consequence indirectly. If you are always there, people assume you always will be. Assumptions remove caution. Caution is the foundation of respect. Dangerous men allow absence to speak. Their silence is not neglect. It is positioning. Absence forces recalibration without explanation. This is why accessibility weakens even strong men, and why controlled distance protects even imperfect ones. What comes next explains how distance becomes dominance without force. Authority is not announced. It is felt before interaction. Distance creates that feeling. When someone doesn't rush toward you, your brain assigns weight to them automatically. Stillness suggests control. Control suggests power. Good men close distance too quickly. They lean in emotionally. They fill silence. They remove mystery. Without mystery, the mind relaxes. Relaxation removes respect. Dangerous men let distance do the work. They don't explain themselves early. They don't chase understanding. They let others interpret and overthink. Distance forces projection. People project strength onto silence, confidence onto restraint, intent onto ambiguity. This projection builds authority without effort. Good men try to be understood. Dangerous men allow themselves to be misunderstood. Misunderstanding keeps people careful. Careful people don't exploit. When distance exists, people monitor their behavior. They choose words more carefully. They test less. They assume consequences exist, even if none are shown. Authority is sustained by unanswered questions. Why doesn't he react? Why doesn't he pursue? Why doesn't he explain? Each question adds weight. Good men remove questions immediately. They clarify, they justify, they reassure, and with every answer, authority leaks away. Dangerous men let discomfort remain unresolved. Discomfort sharpens awareness. Awareness prevents entitlement. Entitlement is what creates users. Distance doesn't push people away. It forces them to approach correctly. Next, we expose why emotional restraint terrifies manipulators more than aggression ever could. Anger is predictable. Kindness is exploitable. But emotional restraint confuses predators. They don't know how to provoke you, and what cannot be provoked cannot be controlled. Good men react emotionally to disrespect. They explain their pain. They seek fairness. That reaction teaches others where to press next time. Dangerous men do not reward disrespect with emotion. They respond with silence, with withdrawal, with reduced access. This creates consequence without conflict. Manipulators fear emotional restraint more than rage, because rage still engages. Restraint ends the game entirely. No reaction means no leverage. Good men hope behavior will change through understanding. Dangerous men let consequences teach instead. Understanding invites debate. Consequences end discussion. When emotion is removed, people adjust automatically. They become careful. They become respectful. Not because you asked, but because they sensed risk. This is the moment exploitation ends, not when you fight back, but when you stop being usable. Silence, distance, control. Good men want to be valued. Dangerous men make themselves costly. Value attracts users. Cost creates respect. When you stop explaining, stop reacting, stop offering access, people don't leave. They recalibrate. And those who don't were never worth keeping. This is why good men are used, and why dangerous men aren't. Not because they harm others, but because they are no longer harmless.